And welcome to the City of Topeka Planning Commission meeting. We are a commission appointed by the mayor and city council to plan for the orderly growth and development of the community, to hold public hearings, and to make recommendations to the city council on planning items. Please note that city council rules state that the public hearings for planning cases shall be conducted solely by the planning commission. No additional public hearings will be conducted by the city council. Tonight's cases are tentatively scheduled to be heard by the city council next month. Agendas can be found at topeka.org. For cases that require public hearings, the procedure will be as follows. First, the planning staff will summarize the case. Next, we will hear from the applicant or the representative. Then we will receive public testimony. Public comments should be addressed solely to the chair and are limited to 4 minutes. Amanda, would you please take the roll?
Commissioner Dean?
Here.
Commissioner Freed?
Here.
Commissioner Herron?
Here.
Commissioner Pearson?
Here.
Commissioner Tobabin?
Here.
Commissioner Nager?
Here.
Commissioner Kaut?
Here.
7 are present. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Next is approval of minutes of July 17, 2023.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Culp?
I move approval of the minutes as submitted by staff.
Thank you. For a second.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Would you please take the roll?
Commissioner Tobabin?
Aye.
Commissioner Pearson?
Abstain.
Commissioner Nager?
Aye.
Commissioner Kaut?
Aye.
Commissioner Herron?
Aye.
Commissioner Freed?
Abstain.
Commissioner Dean?
Aye.
Minutes passed. 5-0 with 2 abstaining.
Thank you. Next up is declaration of conflict of interest or ex parte communications by members of the commission or staff.
I will be abstaining from PUD 1305 today.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Nager?
On PUD 2305, I heard from someone who lives in the neighborhood, not really pro or con, just more information. I helped point her in the right direction. And then the applicant remains my landlord, as the other ones. We've not discussed this at all. I think I'm able to make an impartial decision.
Okay. Thank you.
Not meeting these, but just still recovering from knee surgery. So for the folks on the commission, the staff, and people in the audience, if I have to stand up and do a little marching in place to keep the knee flexible, it's not trying to be disrespectful, just trying to keep my knee working.
Thank you. Any other communications? If not, we can move into action items. First up is number 1, CU 23-04, St. Peter and St. Paul Orthodox Christian Church. I believe Ms. Driver?
Thank you, Mr. Dean. This is case CU 2304, St. Peter and Paul Christian Orthodox Church. The applicant's requesting a conditional use permit for religious assembly use, along with accessory cemetery with access from a local street. That access is more than 300 feet from a major traffic thoroughfare of Southeast Adams Street, which would be at Southeast Adams and 38th Street. The main reason for the CUP is because they do not satisfy a zoning code requirement that their driveway access be located within 300 feet, a major traffic thoroughfare. Their access will be within, taken from Southeast 40th Street. Property comprises 29.4 acres. It's located more generally at the southwest intersection of Southeast 37th Street and Southeast Adams. The nearest point of access to the property will be located off the dead-end street stub of Southeast 40th Street. That is approximately 2,783 feet from the closest arterial intersection of Southeast Adams. Going into the site plan further, The proposed development in 3 phases. Phase 1 will include a fellowship hall for the current 85-member community and office space. Phase 2 will include construction of the church temple for a maximum seating capacity of 250 seats, an educational building, and an accessory church cemetery for parishioner burial services only. All funerals and burials will be held entirely on site when they get to the point of developing the cemetery. Phase 3 will include construction of another parish hall with an additional 50 new parking stalls. Phases 2 and 3, as indicated by the applicant, are dependent on funding. Once they reach that level of funding, then they would build those. So within the current time frame, they would be looking at phase 1, which is just for the 85-member community. The neighborhood is predominantly zoned R1 single-family dwelling district. There is a floodplain and a natural stream corridor along the eastern side of the property, which acts as a transition between this property and Southeast Adams Street. The site plan denotes a 30-foot building setback along the west and north property boundaries. Actual setbacks, as shown on the site plan, are much greater, being over 200 feet from the residential properties on the west side. The cemetery itself is located over 250 feet from the closest residential lots when that's developed. The site plan will provide a total of 130 parking stalls. 80 of those would be developed with phase 1, 50 being developed in phase 3. It more than meets the requirement in the zoning code for the maximum capacity of 250, for the maximum seating capacity. So the phase 1 will have more than enough parking as required by the code. One of the primary guidelines and related to your approval of the CUP is whether the use will have an adverse impact on the road network caused by external traffic, since their access is not within 300 feet of the major thoroughfare or the major arterial street. Staff believes that standard is really intended to ensure your traffic arriving and departing is concentrated on the roadway that has the best means of handling the traffic. Our traffic engineering staff did request a traffic impact analysis be done. Based upon that, they looked at the maximum build-out of the facility, 250 seats. The current phase assumes only 85-member community. The TIA and our traffic engineering staff did conclude adjacent streets have sufficient capacity to accommodate the use. Traditionally, religious assembly uses such as churches are considered appropriate land uses within urban, suburban, low-density residential areas. And mainly you're looking at how those impacts from the use can be mitigated. In this case, really building setbacks, site design, landscaping should ensure that it's compatible with the surrounding area. The length of time the property has been vacant has been significant. It's never developed under its current zoning for single family. That is something you would consider as well. Staff has made a determination there should not be harm to the value of nearby properties. Typically, developed properties properly maintained have a better impact on the surrounding neighborhood than undeveloped properties. Staff is recommending approval. There are some conditions in the staff report which the applicant has agreed to, and I am open for any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff? Bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Annie, stormwater. The staff report notes that the city's stormwater regs require detention and treating. I don't see a detention structure on the drawings. Is that something that'll come up? Will there be site plan review?
Yes, that will come up. This is a conceptual site plan. That will come up when they get to the site plan review phase. And I don't know how they intend to do that, if they're going to do that by phase or they're going to come up, if they're going to plan stormwater for the entire project. But yes, that will come out when they get to the site plan review phase.
Okay, so there could be a detention structure for
That
all
is
3
correct,
phases
yes.
or multiple
Yes,
structures.
yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
The application mentioned that there's only been 2 funeral services for since 2019. If they find that they're not using the whole cemetery grounds, maybe they want to make it a bit smaller, use that land for something else, I guess how complicated or flexible is using something that's designated as a cemetery to change it to something else, whether the church wants to do that or anyone else?
Well, there are requirements in the conditional use permit regulations for what constitutes a major and a minor amendment. So I believe if they are increasing the floor area of what's shown on the site plan by 10%, that would be, it would, if it's more than 10%, that would be a major amendment to the code. But yeah, I mean, I think if they're wanting to add buildings where there's a cemetery currently, that might constitute a major amendment.
All right.
Yep.
All right. Thank you.
Freed?
Do you know, is the school intended just for like Sunday religious school? Or is it intended also to be used a weekday as a school?
They do not have a weekly school. That's all for educational classes that are associated with the church. So I think what they've said is those services are Saturdays, Sundays, and Wednesdays.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm sure the applicant can elaborate, though, on what they intend to use the school for.
Any other questions? If not, is there an applicant present for a presentation?
Good evening, Mr. Chair, Kevin Holland, Flatt and Strobel Engineers, and I can add and clarify anything. A couple of questions. I think the cemetery, this is a relatively small parish. Full build out, 250 members, full build out being sometime down the road. Current membership, 85 to 100. That's full families, which is a very small parish and a very large piece of property. So I think designating a cemetery and leaving it a cemetery is probably a good thing, understanding that 100 years from now, hopefully the parish is still going strong and growing. Not saying it'll be full in 100 years, but at the same time, it's a large tract of land, and designating that cemetery, I think, is probably a very beneficial piece to the overall church, so that designates the differences. I don't believe they would ever need additional build out. Hopefully, God willing, they would need additional space for build out, but that's significant. Right now they're in 3 phases, and it's all kind of congregated right in the middle. We would have detention based upon the city's criteria as well, and we have a lot of property. Most likely, we would do it down near the stream buffer, so that all water's going downhill, and we can hold it and then eventually drop it into the creek bed. And as for the school, they would love to get to the size where they would hold school, but at this point, I think it's religious schooling and or any sort of assemblies, church camp, anything like that they can do. But no formal schooling is scheduled at this point, but it's a school building that they can use for functions, for getting together and for camaraderie and such like that. So a lot of different pieces, and hopefully the full build out can come in the near future. But at this point, as with all of your religious pieces, they're built on funding. And that funding is very difficult, and that's why it's put together in 3 phases already, trying to get the first phase up and out of the ground. Again, I think trying to keep all trees in place along the property line so that there is somewhat of a landscape buffer between the church and the residences, understanding as well as keeping a couple 100 feet there so that there's a little bit of separation. I know as you drive through town, this is an existing church there at Huntoon and Medford, a small little church right there, and to get the feel for what we're dealing with, They're growing, which is a good thing, and have outgrown that facility. They've been in that facility for probably coming up on 30 years. I think that's pretty close. And at this point, they acquired this piece of property a couple of years ago, and now are pushing forward to the next step to try to actually relocate their church there.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the applicant?
Mr. Chairman, Kevin, if you can answer this for the applicant, the conditions that are set out in the staff report, you've seen those? the
Yes, sir.
6 conditions. Is the applicant comfortable with all those?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Next is public testimony. Anyone who wishes to speak on the subject can come up to the podium, and you have 4 minutes per person. Is there anybody who would like to speak on this topic?
Good evening, Commission. Thank you for the opportunity. Just real briefly, there's an interesting history with this. The property was owned by Buddhists, and the Buddhists had intending on making a sanctuary there and a temple. And the Buddhists were unsuccessful, and I was the real estate broker that handled the transaction. And in the closing, the Buddhist lady, the matriarch of the family, said, she goes, I prayed to God to sell this because our family really needed to sell it. And my brother had been working so hard and mowing it, manicuring it like a golf course, and he really needs to move on. And so I prayed to God. And she goes, I felt guilty being a Buddhist praying to God. And she goes, and then all of a sudden this happened. And the way it happened for me personally was I had intended on buying the property myself. I had met with the broker and the Buddhists, and later that afternoon, before I made the offer, I met Father Nikolai and said, I've got the land for you. Part of the transaction, they also carved off a small parcel for their monk, and the monk still lives in the property today. And it's a temple to them, and their shrine is in there. So it's really a beautiful thing that the Buddhist goal and dream was passed on to the Orthodox Church. So I think they've got a really nice layout, and I don't think the graveyard really needs to be concerned to anybody. If you drive by 17th and Gage and go to St. David's, and think about my mom, Virginia Bantleon. She's buried there. And you would never think that there's a graveyard there, but it exists. And think about McFarland Farms. It's one of the nicest neighborhoods right across from a graveyard. So this is one of the most insignificant parts of the whole development is the fact that there may be some remains of the parishioners there. So I hope that you can support this. I've grown very fond of the applicant and their church family. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Before you step away, could you
wait a second.
mention your name?
Oh, yeah, sure. I didn't even have a shot clock. Thank you. And I kept it short. My name's Henry McClure, and I'm a Topeka resident, actually 4 generations. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all.
Thank you.
Former planning commissioner. Good night.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in the audience who'd like to speak on this? And if you first say your name before you begin, please.
I'm Jerry Lester, and I live at 3900 Southeast Quincy Street. I'm at the kind of the top of the hill on Quincy, and this building is going to be in my backyard and in some of my neighbors' backyard from where I live up there. And what I've done is I've done a small survey where I've asked some of my neighbors what they thought about the project back there, and I've got a list of 8 or 9 people that would like for this project not to go on in our backyard. I've got a map that shows our houses in relationship to the property, so that you can see that that this is all in our backyards. We've got 3 houses over here at Evans, where where Evans Street runs from 37th Street all the way up to one of their proposed entrances. And these houses are so close to the entrance that they should probably have to buy those houses to keep from violating their rights to privacy and what have you, because they're really close to the street there. And same thing for the house over here at 40th Street. Anyway, I'd like to leave this with you.
If you give it to the clerk.
Okay. All right. Where my concerns come in is this is all about not being within 300 feet of a major thoroughfare to have a cemetery or a church back there. And going through our neighborhood, it's really small streets. You know, the street survey and everything talks like it's easy to run 100 cars a day or whatever through there a couple of times a day, but they're really narrow streets. And I think that's unsafe for all of us that live in the neighborhood. And what I was unsure about was down on Adams, they've got another entry that wouldn't need a special use permit. And I wondered why they didn't use that entry. And that's what I wanted to say and what my concern is. That if they came in off of Adams Street, they wouldn't need a special use permit and could do everything they needed without using and endangering our neighborhood by using Evans and Humboldt. Humboldt is very narrow. Okay, I hope that you guys use some good judgment. It's a nice project, but coming into our neighborhood's an unsafe thing to do. And that's the way we feel there. All right, you guys have a good evening.
Thank you. Evening, my name is Joseph Ledbetter, and I live here in Topeka. I also have property in the 300-foot area of notification. I am for this development, and I said so with an email to planning earlier this month. One of the things that was mentioned is, or maybe not clearly, is there's 29 acres here, and these acreages have not been developed in 60 years that the city's been in that area. That land needs to be utilized. And this is a good use. There's angst about a small cemetery. I think the cemetery was explained to me by the reverend that runs this church, or father, that it's about an acre, and it'll be probably almost unseen. You can't see it from the road, even where this development is, because of the tree line. And then on top of the hill, it's going to be down below, as I understand topography, the church building itself. Now, one of the things that, being an attorney, I notice, people bringing up people that aren't here. If they want to testify on the record, they need to be here. What somebody said or might have said really doesn't have application here. And that's not a fault of him. It's just simply saying, if you are that concerned, show up and speak. I have. And one of the things that has gone on down here in Southern Hills, which is the immediate area to the west, there's about 30 houses put in there about 15 to 16 years ago that were brand new. And now there's about 25 vacant lots, and it's my contention that the city needs to do everything it can to get people to build in the city, and certainly a church is a good neighbor. I haven't seen any churches that weren't in my time here in Topeka, which is more than a couple decades. And I just don't get the angst about why people don't want this area developed. And I also, at one time, a few years ago, was president of Highcrest, which is to the north, and it was a volunteer job, and I helped, in my own way, help turn that area around. But I always looked at this Southern Hills area
as very desirable property. That's probably why I bought some lots, and I sold some of them, and they built houses. But this area has been really overlooked for development, and it, like so many pockets in this city, it needs to be filled in. We need more development inside the city limits. And it's just good planning, it's good city management, and I've also got an MPA as well as a law degree, but I really believe this area has a lot of potential. Is this going to tip the potential? Maybe not, but it at least takes an area that is going to be filled in and put to good use. There's also a vacant area just to the north, about a block, where they're now building, I think it's 40 new housing units for another church. I'm sorry I don't have the name of it, but it's there's a lot of development going on just to the north, and a lot of earth being moved. So I do support this, and any questions of me? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Robert Starr, 3730 Southeast Evans Drive. Been a resident of the area since the early 70s. I had my house built. At the end of my lot was a wheat field. Now I own a full city block long from Humboldt to Lakewood on the east side, maintained. The 25 lots Mr. Ledbetter is referring to, I took a drive up through that area. I turned a bunch of those lots in to the city vegetation control. There's at least 10 to 12 lots, weeds that high. Street conditions. They did a repave on one block at the end of 38th and Evans. From 38th and Evans to the bottom of the hill, we've got cracks that wide for areas as big as this room in more than one place. 38th Street is the same way. They're talking about the traffic flow on Evans being increased by 54%. In the wintertime, the hill from 37th up into Evans is so steep, 90% of the people have to come down Evans, take 38th Street, either over to Adams or Colfax, down to 37th Street. In the Planning Commission, there was no emergency route survey shown. As the gentleman alluded to earlier, Evans Drive, 38th Street are both narrow streets. There's parking on both sides of the street constantly. So the 38th Street and Evans, with the traffic of the construction, is going to be torn up, or it's going to have to be resurfaced. A overlay of a half an inch is not going to sustain the damage that is there and will be added to with the additional traffic. That's pretty much all I've got that hasn't been covered by others. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Culp.
sorry to interrupt, but the document that's going around, the petition that's been passed around, I don't know whether the applicant has seen it or not, but I think before we go complete this matter, we ought to make sure that they have it, and if any response they want to make to it, I think would be appropriate.
Okay. Once you're finished with it. Mr. Holland, could you come up for a second? Could you review that and your if you have an owner with you also.
We do
Thank you.
have the clergy as well as several parishioners of the existing church here as well. So I will pass this on, and if you're all right, I share that.
Typically, just so we all know, whatever's shared with us is usually uploaded to the internet so everyone can see it publicly for transparency. So, are there anyone else who wants to speak on this?
My name's Brenda Gritton. I actually live at 239 Southeast 40th Terrace, right across from the water tower. And I do apologize. My husband can't be here because not everybody can take off of work. It was said people weren't here because they didn't want to be here. Some people couldn't. There was also mentioned that they were talking about having the runoff going down the hill. Going down the hill is coming right at my property. So does that mean my backyard is going to be flooding because of it? I don't like the idea where they're talking about putting the cemetery. When I go out on my driveway, I will see the cemetery. I'm sorry, it's not just their cemetery. I wouldn't want my family cemetery where I could just step out on my driveway and see. And when we spoke to the minister originally, it was going to be a small church up there. My husband and I both agreed that that would be a good deal. But now they're talking about being such a huge building, all the outside buildings, they're going to be using our Stubby Street to bring all their equipment through. And we have a lot of concern about that because that does damage the roadway. And who's going to come in and fix it? We'll go several years before the city comes and does any repairs. We don't like the idea of having that large of a church, especially not a cemetery up there. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other?
My name's Brandy Lang. I live at 3726 Southeast Evans Drive. I wasn't even notified. I received no letter that this was going to happen. All the church wants to do is comply with what the little state statutes are, okay, or the city statutes. What about the community at large? I've had signs in my yard and numerous people stopped to talk to me because they had no idea what was going on. They received no notice. I've done research. Ledbetter said there was no research. Well, I've got research. The first questions I have is who's going to pay for the construction of these buildings? They said the church is going to pay for it. Okay, I worked for a church. It took them 40 years to gain the money to build one church building. Nothing else, just the church building. They're not taking out a bank loan at all? Okay, well, they talked about the church only being used for church services. They're getting ready to do a food festival. That's a whole bunch of traffic in there. And it's open to the public, so anybody could be coming through this area. That means these people are also checking out all of our homes in that area, okay? What's the age of the church members? Are they going to be able to maintain the area around the church? Are they going to be able to maintain the church because it's white? Do you know what tagging and vandalism is going to happen? I'm sorry, that's a problem. How many of their members are male versus female? What is the cultural makeup? What is the political makeup? These are all things that have to be considered. How many of these patrons are permitted, can still carry? Okay, what's going to happen in the first time there's a shooting at a church? And we all hear about the shootings at churches that go on, whether it's here or someplace else, okay? So what are they going to do about unruly patrons that come into the church? How are they going to handle that? Are they just going to put them in the community and we have to deal with them? Who's going to maintain the yard for the church? Who's going to maintain the grounds? Who's going to be cleaning the building? How many people are there? How many times is this going to happen? The new housing development Ledbetter's talking about, okay, it's right now it says senior housing. I've already been told by the city commission, they can't do that. They can't label it senior housing because that's against the Fair Housing Act. It's illegal. Okay, so you're saying 40 homes. So how many of those homes are going to have cars? How many of those people are going to be driving up and down? When was this traffic study done? Was it done before or after that all that construction was going to be going on? They talk about the speed. What's going to be the speed for that area? Is it going to be increased? Is it going to be decreased? Are the patrons going to know which way to take to get to the church? Are they going to go through our city? What about the bus stop? They talk about bus stop. Okay, the bus stop's on 37th Street. This church is all the way up on a hill, over a mile away from the bus stop. And there's no plans to put in a closer bus stop. What about the crime in the area? Okay, I did a little bit of research on crime. That area is zoned F for failure due to crime. The crime right there is so high, it received an F. That's why it's not developed. They talk about church services. There's Sunday at 9 a.m. There's Sunday at 10 a.m. There's Saturday services at 5:45. They talk about catechism. They talk about potlucks, men luncheon, ESL classes. You know, how long is all that going to be? They talk about the cemetery. Are they vaults? If not, these caskets are going to disintegrate, get into the groundwater. You have contamination. They're not mowing the grass.
Just a second, so the time's up. Are we okay, allow another minute? How much time do you,
I'm just about done, so another minute would probably be fine.
okay.
They talk about no effect on the value. Research shows that when you put a cemetery in, the property value decreases by 12%. That doesn't include any viruses or bacteria released from decaying bodies. That is airborne. That means anybody in that area is subject to it. It was so bad in one area, the WHO, the health department, World Health Department, did a study. And it was so bad that they were required to go in there. So they talk about the cemetery plots being for the church itself. What's to stop somebody from selling their plot? So that means it's open to the community for anybody to go in there. What if somebody dies and they decide to inherit that cemetery plot to somebody else? What about vandalism to the cemeteries? We know churches are vandalized in Topeka. We've seen articles on it. We've seen a church bus that was just vandalized. Who's going to pay for this? So I will provide all my research and information to Are there any questions I can answer before I leave?
I don't believe so. Thank you. Is there anybody else in the audience who'd like to speak on this case?
Good evening. My name is Rosemary Prest, and I live at 1938 Southwest Westwood Drive here in Topeka. And my husband and I are both here, and we were one of the 4 original families 30 years ago in October that established the Orthodox Church. We connected with the Antiochians at large. And when we purchased the property on Medford and Huntoon, we were advised that it was not a good area. There were a lot of rentals, there was a lot of crime, there were a lot of drugs, and we considered that, and we thought God will provide, and He always has. We've had things happen to our church building. We've had things stolen, not anymore, not probably a lot less in the neighborhood. I can assure you that the neighbors' houses have sold for good prices. Our church has not brought down the property values for any of the homes that are near us. In fact, the area has been cleaned up quite a bit. it seems to be a very safe area now. We go into this purchase of this new property with the same kind of belief that God will protect us and provide and take care of us. We wanted to be a church that would encompass the community around us, and we have. We've been good neighbors. We have reached out to our neighbors with picnics. We've reached out to our neighbors with open houses. We have reached out to our neighbors with helping with yard work when they were elderly and everything else, and we want to go into this property with the same type of attitude. We'd like to someday eventually be known as a neighborhood church. The Orthodox faith is one of the fastest growing faiths in the United States of America, and we feel like that's very pleasing to God. We will take care of the property. The housing and the cemetery, especially the cemetery, will not be viewed by the entrance. It will be just a very small area. The Orthodox Church, because of the cemetery, will stay here forever. It won't be sold and given away because of the cemetery. We are about 85 people now. A third of us in answering the question are children. We have people that come from Manhattan and Fort Riley, and most of us are, though, from Topeka. We are nurses, we are doctors, we are teachers, we are policemen, we are firemen, we are IT people. We are just you. And the people that are in the community that we're moving to. We found it to be a beautiful area. We found it to be a gift from God. It literally just fell into our laps, and we were excited for what it could be. And so we hope to be good neighbors. We plan on it, and we will take care of the area. You can go by Medford and Huntoon now and see our church. It's a beautiful little building. We have, with just 4 families, done amazing things to that property. And we may only have 85 people now, but we have had at least triple that in the 30 years that we've been there. But we're a mobile community. People come, they get different jobs, they move away, more people move in. And so we are slow growing, but I believe that, that eventually we will be a thriving community within that neighborhood. And we're just very excited, all of us are. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep, you can bring it back. Are there any others who would like to speak on this?
Hello, my name is Dusty Slocum. I did not come here prepared to speak, so I don't have anything to present. I live at 3805 Southeast Quincy, directly across the street from where the church is planning to build. I do not have a problem with the facility being built. However, I feel like a private cemetery is unneeded within the city limits. We have plenty of cemeteries that are public in nature, and there's no reason why their parishioners cannot be buried in a public cemetery. My request is to allow the church to be built, but have a public access off of Adams with a parking lot to not take away from our community and our privacy, but to allow them to have their church, but not with the cemetery. They can have their events with the parking lot off of Adams. We don't need the excess traffic through our streets. That new property that's being built for, their duplexes for lack of a better word, elderly, that is going to increase our traffic, which is already staggering level for me. When I built my house, I built it in 2006. And when I built it, I was a single mom. It was affordable. It was a $7,000 lot because it was not attractive property, and it still isn't attractive property. But the people that have built there, we maintain it. We love our property because it is not overly built. We are a small community. We know each other. We love each other. We look out for each other. We don't want strangers coming in and taking over our property, and then we don't have that community that we currently have. So my request from planning is to tweak what's being requested so that there's a medium, that we're meeting in the middle here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I clarify something?
Yes.
I know the conversation has talked about coming off of Adams several times. Unfortunately, the property does not border Adams, and we do have a stream buffer and significant water way between Adams as well as the eastern property line. So I just wanted to, we would love to come in that way as well and come off of a thoroughfare, but our property does not border Adams.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak? Yes?
My name is Dan Lang, 3726 Southeast Evans Drive. Lived there recently. My wife and myself came back to help take care of her parents. We enjoy the community. We enjoy what we have there. And one thing we have a problem with during the winter time, I don't think the church understands exactly the location, the problem with that is. You cannot get up the hill because of the ice. You're gonna have a problem with that. You cannot get up the hill on Evans Street. You start going up that hill, you gotta start to come back down. Many of the streets the same way. Coming up to their location, I'm not sure exactly how many people of the congregation have been involved with the location there. Like I said, you're trying to protect the community and you want to protect your property too. Also, one other thing, in that community there, in that local area, 37 drug offenders, 43 sex offenders, 21 violent offenders. We hear shootings on a regular basis. Unfortunately, the police are overwhelmed. They can't take care of all of it. And right now, we talked about the narrowness of the streets. To get up that street, sometimes you got to go around another car. If you start to increase the traffic up there, 43% on a weekend, you're not going to be able to get up and get around. How would you feel about the same situation at your location, where you cannot get to your driveways? You have more traffic, you have kids on the street, you might have a chance to pin them. I believe they would not do that, but there is always that chance. And we appreciate a church. Myself, I was a deacon at my last church. I appreciate what was done there. We reached out to the community and worked with them. I do not believe that location is really pertinent to a church because it's going to be uphill. They're going to have problems getting there. They're going to have problems getting back. It's a danger sometimes for the community, for the parishioners. That's all I have to say. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you. Are there anybody else who'd like to speak on this particular issue? If not, we will close the public hearing portion, public testimony, and move to discussion by commissioners. Mr. Cobb?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Annie, this is and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a but-for situation here. But for the distance, the 300-foot, they could do everything they're proposing to do of right as
Yes,
with the
that's
R1
correct.
zoning.
It's because they don't have that direct access or that access within 300 foot of the arterial or collector.
So it seems to me then that the issue that we should be discussing is the road.
That is correct.
And several conferees have raised that issue, but that is the only issue if the property can be developed of right.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And that includes, do we have cemeteries of permitted use in R1?
Go ahead.
Cemetery as a primary use or a principal use is not permitted by right in R1. This is an accessory cemetery. It's very limited. The maximum size is shown on the site plan is 1.5 acres.
Okay, but Mike, would you agree that the issue that for discussion here is the road, the condition, the capacity of the road, which has been studied by the applicant's engineers and by the city's traffic engineers?
Yes, I would agree that that's the primary issue. That's.
Is there any other issue?
Well, I think it's a conditional use permit, so we evaluate that using the golden factors. And so we've addressed that in the staff report, but a lot of it probably doesn't, it's permitted by right. So I think it is really primarily the traffic. Some could say it's strictly about the volume of the traffic and traffic operations. And the traffic study that was done and our traffic engineering staff's response to that concludes that the streets are sufficient to accommodate the traffic. Keep in mind that there are a lot of different ways in and out of this area, so the traffic will be dispersed. But the streets are of a capacity and design to accommodate the traffic. In one of the findings, it makes a comparison of whether if this was developed under its use permitted by right, which is single-family residential development, you could have a lot of units in there. It's 29 acres. So even after taking out the land that you really can't develop very easily, which is the floodplain and the stream, there's still a lot of capacity for single-family residential development. I believe that it doesn't, the special use requirement that addresses that requirement that the religious assembly be within 300 feet of a major thoroughfare, it could also speak to the character and the changing nature apart from the volume of traffic and the capacity of the street. I shouldn't say apart from the volume, but apart from the traffic operations issue, is it going to change the character of the neighborhood? And when we evaluated this, we did take that into account. We did think about that. So the traffic volume, I believe, is estimated as 108 trips on its busiest day. And that's trips in, trips out. So it'll be noticeable, apart from traffic operations, it will be noticeable, but, I think that's a more subjective evaluation. I think when you consider how this land could be used, on balance, this is a pretty appropriate use for this property, it seems.
Well, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate your answer too, Annie. It seems like the underlying zoning, which remains as R1 with the CUP, it kind of belies concerns or any questions about incompatibility of use, because we say as a matter of law and policy in this city and almost everywhere around the country that if you have R1 zoning, you can build a house, you can build a school, you can build a church. And that's what we have here.
If I might add, Commissioner, this conditional use permit, if approved, will be tied to this site plan that requires a substantial setback. And that setback would not be a requirement if this was developed if it was permitted by right use. So if this took access off of Adams, for example, I don't even think that's feasible because of the stream crossing, if nothing else. But if it did, this would be a use permitted by right, and you wouldn't have much of a control over the setback. I mean, they would have to meet minimum building setbacks, which is 30 feet along the perimeter. But
So you'd essentially be able to put a church building 30 feet from the property line against the neighborhood.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
But I also, I think, you shouldn't brush the traffic issues aside. They're real issues. And so what we've all tried to do is be honest about the traffic impacts and do the traffic study and be open about that.
Thanks. Thank you.
Mike, or Annie, on an R1, we have 29 acres. How many single-family houses how big can a lot be? How many can we fit on this lot?
So if you take the undevelopable parts of the land out, I think with streets and everything, at a gross density, after accounting for streets, I could probably get 4 lots per acre, 3 to 4 lots per acre.
Okay.
And there is a number in here. It's on
Yeah, we looked at.
pages 8 and 9 of the staff report.
We looked at maybe 15 acres could be developed at 4 dwelling units per acre. And I think an estimate in the ITE manual is that each single-family home generates about 10 trips per day, 10 vehicle trips per day. So that's where we got that.
So with the not coming through us, 60 houses could be developed, and that'd be times 10 trips a day.
And yes, but you also would have to consider the fact that traffic engineering will probably require those public streets be connected through as well. So there's an impact there that they would have to consider.
Okay.
You'll have more traffic going directly through that neighborhood,
Okay.
as opposed to, in this case, where they're just going to build them as dead-end cul-de-sacs.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for staff or any discussion? Meg?
This is just a comment, but I think a few people got the idea that I was concerned about the cemetery. I just know that once something's a cemetery, there's less flexibility for use for someone else than basically anything else. So I want to make sure that was considered. And one of the members of the congregation said they intend on this being a permanent house of faith, and so the need for that flexibility, I don't think there is a need for flexibility, so I'm not concerned about that.
Okay. I would just want to just mention, I was pointed out the flooding, when you do the site plan, it's required that you retain stormwater going off the site, and it'd be going into we have a big, large storm area. So it would be funneled to that area. Would that be accurate? Or,
Yeah, that's accurate.
so you can't just let water sheet off into someone's property. It's got to be taken somewhere.
Yeah, at some point, there's a threshold of development that requires detention. And then there's another threshold that requires not only detention, but also treatment, where you have to treat the stormwater before it leaves the site. And this is going to reach that level. It's going to be an acre or more.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr.
Can I make a comment about the discussion about what could happen of right versus and what triggered the requirement for a CUP here? I was not intending to overlook the requirement, as I think Mike pointed out. We have to go through the golden criteria, but those are all relevant because it's a CUP. And I think, Anna, you did an excellent job of write-up of the golden factor analysis. But again, the driving issue here, no pun intended, is the road.
Chair, just one further question on the west property line. I guess I want a little better understanding of the screening. Is there an anticipation of doing anything more to screen the property, or, I mean, I know we have a very good setback.
Well, first of all, so with staff, this would require the city landscaping standards, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And the city landscaping code does address what a significant tree is, and I believe it's minimum 6 inches in caliper. So yes, they'll have to be submitting landscape plans at that time when they get to the site development phase. And at that point, they would go out and survey the trees and make a determination of which need to be retained and which do not need to be retained. And then if they need to require more landscaping, they can do so at that time.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments or discussion on this?
I know there's been discussion about traffic and reading the traffic study. I mean, we're looking at the primary time of the traffic as being on Sunday mornings, which is not when a lot of the other peak traffic would be for people leaving and coming home from work or going to school. So I see that as an impact on Sunday mornings, yes, but I don't see that, and there is a Saturday service as well, maybe Wednesdays, but Sundays tend to be the biggest time, and so I see that as, while there will be an impact on the traffic, it's not impacting other typical heavy traffic loads that are going through the community at that time, morning and evening on weekdays when folks are going to work and to school.
When I'm looking at this, I'm thinking what I would want if I were in the neighborhood, and versus what could be there, a whole bunch of 60 single-family residences. I would rather have a church that would take the whole lot. I mean, it would keep it more, it'd be a lot of green space, which I would find more attractive. And so I would probably want to lean that way myself, but. And if there's no other discussion, are there any motions? Mr. Nager?
I move for approval, subject to the conditions that are in the staff report.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussions on the motion? If not, would you please take the roll? Vote.
Commissioner Dean?
Aye.
Commissioner Freed?
Aye.
Commissioner Herron?
Aye.
Commissioner Kaut?
Aye.
Commissioner Nager?
Aye.
Commissioner Pearson?
Aye.
Commissioner Tabavin?
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. Next action item tonight is PUD 23-05 Topeka Prime Sports. Ms. Brown?
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Zoe Brown, and I'm the planning intern. And the application I have before you is Topeka Prime Sports, LLC.
You might hold on just a second. Give everyone a chance to step out.
Okay.
Good to go.
The applicant is proposing a rezoning from R1 Single Family to a planned unit development for a cheer gym and related activities of Topeka Prime Sports. The application is for a PUD with no master plan, and there are no variances associated with the PUD. The site is located at 3601 Southwest 33rd Street on 2.63 acres, and staff recommends approval, subject to conditions outlined in the report. The land use will be limited to R1 uses and Topeka Elite Cheer's intended use as a cheer gym. And as a reminder, planned unit development is essentially a custom zone dictated by conditions that control for potentially incompatible uses of the site. This is the zoning map here, and as you can see, the area around the site is almost entirely R1 zoning. The site is surrounded by single-family detached homes, as well as the Bishop Professional Development Center to the north. The site was previously used as a church, and the church has been vacant for a little over a year. And the applicant is proposing to convert the use of this building, but there will be no major changes to the site. And in R1 zoning, really the only non-residential uses permitted are churches and schools, which is why the proposed project would require a rezoning. And the PUD zone will keep the R1 use standards, but allow for sports and recreation instruction to take place on the site. Currently, the subject property is designated as low-density residential on the future land use map of the Topeka Land Use Growth Management Plan. And the proposed zoning and land use are consistent with the overriding principles of the comprehensive plan, and there are conditions to prevent incompatible uses of the site. We did hold a neighborhood information meeting on August 2nd, and about 10 neighbors attended that, and they asked some questions about the nature of the rezoning and a PUD versus other types of zoning classifications, as well as the operations of the gym and the impact of the gym on the neighborhood. But really the issue at hand here is the balance between a higher intensity land use versus having a vacant property in the neighborhood. Staff recommends approval with conditions. The operations described in the attached statement of operations document are permitted. Sports and recreation instruction uses are permitted, and any substantial changes to the statement may require a PUD amendment. R1 use and dimensional standards apply except where stated, and landscape buffering is required in accordance with the Topeka zoning regulations. And you guys should have been handed a public comment that we received today. But other than that, that's all I have, and the applicant and the representative is here.
All right, thank you. Any questions for staff?
Yes, I have a question. So we spent a lot of time talking about traffic in the last one. My question is, I see that they're talking about classes from 4 to 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. I don't know how long classes go. They talk about 40 to 60 families attending the gym at any one time, and there can be more than one attendee per family. So that may be less than 40 to 60 vehicles coming through. But if you're talking multiple time changes in that 4 to 6 period of time, which on the other traffic study, that's one of the key things. Was there any discussion about a traffic study on this particular?
Yeah, so one thing that, to answer your question, we did get a comment after we received the application from traffic engineering staff. We had said, do you have any, we'd asked them if they had any comments or anything, and they suggested that the applicant should do a trip generation memo. We did discuss it with the traffic engineering staff. We looked at the statement of operations, kind of estimating what the trip generation would look like. If you look at, I think the number we came up with, based on the number of families being served each night, is 60. I think the applicant can go into this a little bit more, but the decision was made to go ahead and keep this on schedule and not ask them to provide a trip generation memo. 2 reasons. We felt we could estimate the trips based on the statement of operations, and also we didn't know if it would make a difference. It wouldn't be substantial enough to require improvements to the local streets. So, that was a decision that was made. And I think you'll need to evaluate whether you need more information to make a decision.
So if I can ask a question of staff, so you said 40 to 60 families, knowing that it could be less than that, but they're also saying 3 to 6 classes per night. So do we know, is it one class runs from 4 to 8 and multiple classes 4 to 8? Are we running multiple classes? Do you know that? So where you may be generating more than 40 to 60 families over the course of that 4 to 8 p.m. as opposed to 40 to 60 families for that entire period of time?
I think our understanding of it is you would have 40 to 60 for the entire evening. So if you divide that into multiple classes, perhaps you have a block of classes in the first hour, block of classes in the next hour. The applicant's going to really have to answer that question tonight, and they are here to answer that question.
I didn't know if you had more information, so I will seek clarification. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
I have just a question for the record. What's the facility to the north?
The Bishop Professional Development Center.
And is it occupied generally during the day or in the evenings?
I'm not honestly very sure.
I'm not positive. I've actually been to things that are out there, and I believe it happens during the day. It's mainly for USD 501, the school district. It's for training and things of that nature. So my sense of it is that most of that happens during the day.
And I think that's accurate, but I'm just pointing that you see a big parking lot there. I think they're offset, so.
If I've got it right, as United Way has used space in there for meetings during the day as well. They've made that space available. So other entities can also use that space during the day.
Are there any other questions for staff? If not, is the applicant present to speak on the issue?
Good evening, Commissioners. Thanks for the opportunity to visit with you. My name's Mark Bernheide with Topeka Prime Sports. be glad to jump right into the questions, or I can give you a little bit more information about it. What the overall goal is, as was mentioned in the staff report, is this facility's been vacant for over a year now. Contains a gym and also a former sanctuary. The goal here is for Topeka Elite Cheer to occupy the facility and use the gym and also the former sanctuary for competitive gym training, cheer training. And I do have Taylor McCade here, who heads Topeka Elite Cheer. She can probably answer the questions about the classes better than I can. But we're looking forward to, we've developed a number of lofts previously downtown, and looking forward to taking a vacant building and making it useful and part of the community again. Like I said, it's been sitting there for over a year vacant, and I think this is a perfect use for it outside of a church. So I'll go ahead and take any questions, and if I can't answer them, I'll call Taylor up here to answer those for you.
Okay. Mark, do you want to?
Well, if you can't answer about the classes, then I'd ask that you call up the other person just so I could get clarification.
Thank you.
Hi there. Like Mark said, my name's Taylor McCaig. I own Topeka Elite Cheer. As far as your question goes, so right now we have 167 families total. That includes all of our recreational classes and our competitive teams. On any given night, right now, everything is staggered. So our largest team has 26 kids on it. Of that, 8 of them, I guess I should say there's like 4 families, so there's multiple kids from families. So you're looking at 25 families max coming in at one time, say 5 o'clock. And then for that team, they're there for an hour and a half, but we may have a recreational class of 8 kids coming in at 5:30. So as far as traffic goes, it should be relatively spread out, like never 60 people coming at one time. Right now, the building we're in is 5,000 square feet. We'd be going to 16,000 square feet. So we definitely have the ability to add more classes. But looking at that 40 to 60 is kind of referring to where we hope to be if this all goes through by the first of the year of having that many coming in. Right now, we have maybe 40 coming on any given night.
So, and just because I'm looking at I guess it's a summary of the information meeting. It said you run classes from 4 to 8 during the week and 3 to 6 classes per night, Monday through Thursday. And it says approximately 40 to 60 families attending the gym at one time. So that means, although you stagger the classes, you could have 30 to 40 families at one time, and then another 30 to 40 coming in another time, and maybe another 30, 40 a third time, depending how the classes operate.
Yeah, typically they would, like half of them would leave before more would arrive, never having that much crossover at one time.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Any other questions for
Mr. Nager?
Do you anticipate any of the activities or instruction to be outside of the building? Or?
So this was a question we had at the neighborhood meeting. As far as like instruction goes and what we do, no, not really, unless it was like hey, we're gonna go outside for popsicles or something. We do a lot of that right now because we're in a non-AC warehouse. It's quite warm, so we go outside for popsicles and do fun things like that. But as far as like using the outside, no. Other than the parking spaces, we are looking forward to having that as an option.
Okay. And then it might be a better question for Mark, but is there a meaningful difference, at least for our purposes, between I've seen Topeka Elite Cheer, Topeka Prime Sports, and Fellowship Bible Church LLC sometimes on this paperwork? Is there?
So Fellowship Bible or Fellowship Highcrest, I believe, is the current owner of the building. We would be, Topeka Prime Sports would be purchasing it. and then Topeka Elite Cheer would be leasing it from Topeka Prime Sports.
Okay.
So the applicant's actually the Highcrest Fellowship because they're the current owner of the property.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? All right, thank you. Next up is public testimony. Are there anybody in the audience who'd like to speak on this line item? Okay, if not, we'll close the public hearing portion and go to discussion by commissioners. Anybody have anything they want to discuss in this? And if not, we'd be open for a motion.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Culp?
I would move approval, subject to the conditions set out in the staff report.
Thank you.
I will second.
Beat you. All right, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, would you please take the vote?
Mr. Topeka?
Aye.
Ms. Pearson?
Aye.
Mr. Nager?
Aye.
Mr. Kaut?
Aye.
Mr. Freed?
Aye.
Mr. Dean?
Aye.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. Next item up is discussion items, revision to the bylaws of the Planning Commission.
Bring your other commissioner back.
Welcome back. Is this,
Do you want me to address it? It's been almost 15 years since your bylaws have been updated, so I took the liberty of drafting something for y'all to consider. The idea for tonight is to answer any questions, discuss, and then vote on it next month.
Mary, I have a question, but other than I see there's an item on public comment, other items. Was that there before, or is that a new change?
That is a new change.
Okay.
Currently, our public comment is kind of iffy and very vague in the current bylaws, so I wanted to clarify it, but you are correct.
Okay. Are there any other specific changes you made to the bylaws that weren't there before?
Section 5, opening up to video and teleconference, that is all new. If you'd like, I can send you a red line version that would show the current bylaws and then the red line changes, if that would be helpful.
That would be helpful.
I think that'd be really
please.
helpful.
Okay, I will send that to y'all.
Is this getting tabled to the next meeting then?
Yeah, I have a question, Mary. I was on the public comment, I was wondering if there's any way to make it more reflective or mirroring what is done in the governing body, specifically under 5.5, Section D, general public comment. Is there our public comment to be more like that instead of having it tied to an agenda item, that at the very end of our meetings or somewhere in our meetings, we could have a general public comment that is related to our business, but not necessarily tied to the agenda?
Oh, yes, like the governing body, at the end of every meeting, there's a general public comment. Of course, sure, if you would want to make a motion to that effect next month, or I can draft a motion for you, and then if there's support for it, okay, I will do that.
I'd be supportive of that as well. The only thing is that I think it might be better suited at the beginning of the meeting so that anyone who does not have interest in a specific item can give their public comment and go and not have to wait for who knows how long. But I'd like to see that too.
Okay.
And then my other concern was in the conflict of interest. It references the city code, and I looked there, and all that says is have an interest, pecuniary or otherwise.
Yes.
That seemed pretty vague to me and squishy. That might, since it's referencing city code, that makes sense why you would do that. So it might be an issue for the governing body, not us. But I know I would like it if it was a clearer standard.
Well, unfortunately, though, we're tied to that city
Yeah.
ordinance. The bylaws don't trump city ordinance,
Yeah.
so until the ordinance changes, we're kind of stuck with this.
All right. Thank you.
I might, when you mentioned doing it at the beginning, just as a discussion, I think that might be confusing if someone who doesn't come to these meetings very often. Yeah. We might get a lot of people preempting the actual agenda item because they don't know that's not supposed to speak.
Yeah.
It might be something to consider. That might, I don't know how we narrow that down. Because if it's open to anyone to speak on any issue.
It's not any issue. It has to be something related to us.
Right.
Just
So-
as a point of clarification.
But the cases in front of us are related to us, so it might, we could get double to public. If it's if it's at the end, everyone knows what happened and then they could.
Well, then I guess I would make the suggestion that our public comment be similar to the governing bodies. It's just a little different, but it clearly states that it's, well, this says specific agenda item 2, I thought.
Yes, comment is allowed for each specific agenda item, so you would want to add, in addition, a general public comment at the end of the meeting.
Right. I guess the
Is
way
that-
your revisions doesn't say it's a specific agenda item.
Line 146.
I don't have lines.
She has more numbers than you do.
I like the idea of it being before, just because I feel like not everybody respects the decorum of public comment, and my only concern would be that they would take the general session as an opportunity to advocate further on a point. So I actually kind of like, and it's just my perspective, I'm open to either one, but I kind of like the idea of that general comment being in the beginning, more so for just what I'd like have happened at other meetings where people don't always respect their time, and then they might try to take additional time to comment.
And I'll throw in again on the other perspective that if you get a bunch of people wanting to comment on any number of things that may be relevant to this commission, but may have nothing to do with agenda items, then the things we're here to do for official actions get pushed back and pushed back. And generally, we have a number of people from the public here for what's actually on the agenda. So for me, I think the priority should be given to those people to get their business done first. So that's my feeling, that I would rather have the general comments at the end of the meeting.
Agreed.
Commissioners, something else I would bring up, and Mary can help us through this, but thinking about some of the logistics about signing up for general public comment too, if it's not tied to a specific item being discussed. Logistically, I know that will work a little different when Topeka speaks, but we'll want to talk about a timeline of having someone sign up. That way we understand the amount of public comment we'll be receiving at least within 24 hours of the meeting, or by 5 o'clock the day of the meeting.
Oh, you would want to require a notification requirement to Amanda, similar to what we do with the city clerk.
I would think so.
All right.
But I'm open-minded.
I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
And just to further complicate it, is there any way, if a person could not show up in person, that it can be done electronically through Topeka Speaks?
Now, that I don't know. I don't think so. Topeka Speaks doesn't have that capability. You mean they would appear like
No,
right
not they
here?
wouldn't appear on the screen. They would be able to make their comments.
Oh, on Topeka Speaks?
Correct.
Oh, they can do that now.
I don't think they can do it unless it's tied to an agenda item.
Oh, I see what you're
So
saying.
we have a general section for general.
General public comment on Topeka Speaks. I don't know, Amanda or Dan?
We might be able to set that up. I don't know either, but I imagine if we can create a case, we could create, a general thing. So, I mean, we can look at that a little
Okay.
closer.
Well, I think if it's going to be a separate agenda item as general comments, then I think you would have created the separate agenda item for them to respond to.
Right, that could be a way to do it. Yeah.
Then it would just show up on the agenda like any other agenda item, right?
Okay, well, we can look into that. Okay,
It just speaks to people with mobility issues.
sure.
Mark?
Chairman, are you going to
Unable
take
because
public comment on this issue?
That's within the discretion of the commission. I mean, it's up to you. It'd probably be appropriate to consider Mr. McClure's comments. 4 minutes, Mr. McClure?
We did get an email in the first packet that has Mr. McClure's email, a page and a half that discusses your positions, just so you know we did receive that email.
Do you have anything to add other than what you've already emailed?
Okay,
Yes, I do.
Okay,
come on up.
4 minutes.
I'm not going to take that much of your
Thank
time, I
you.
promise. Henry McClure, Topeka, Kansas, up downtown. I was a metropolitan planning commissioner when we had city appointees and county appointees. Joan Wagner was mayor and appointed me. She was a nice lady. I like her. So you want to have it at the end. You really do. That's what we did. And I don't know why it evaporated. Our lives, my life sometimes comes down to 4 minutes. Some of the applicants' lives come down to 4 minutes. And we need to be able to communicate with you guys better. It's not illegal to have conversations about what's going on. We need to all, the more comment that we have, the more we can engage the public, the easier it is sometimes. It's a bitter pill to swallow when, sometimes you have development next to you, even though it's by code and approved. And so the more we can get this out on the table and talk about it, one thing I pray that you do is if you don't want your private emails out, everybody in the city council has a topeka.org email. And we ought to be able to communicate with you. Thank you. No, I didn't. Sometimes I'm nervous. And sometimes I'm grateful that the stuff maybe doesn't get said. But having public comment and having more open discussions and building better relationships with developers and the public can only be of the benefit for all of us. So I pray that you would do that. Thank you. And thank you for helping the church. You're good people. Thank you. I'll take a question if you got it. Nah, I knew you would.
Mr. McClure, I'm glad you're still here tonight because I'd asked the chairman before the meeting started about an opportunity to respond to your email that...
I don't know what your email you're looking at. Was it?
Well, it's an
what
email
was I grousing
it's
over?
an email to staff, and it's part of the record.
It's titled Enhancing Transparency and Community Engagement in Planning Commission.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Well, there were a couple things in there that I wanted to respond to and talk. This is planning commission discussion, but I'll direct some of the comments to you, Mr. McClure. There's some things I don't disagree with you at all to have in there, and certainly more communication, better relationships. You can always do better, always do better. I was on the City County Planning Commission too. I think in years before you were. I was Butch Felker and Joan Wagner appointee. Okay, so I had a lot of experience with that joint body. That doesn't mean anything to anybody, but because I think, Mr. Chairman, the last meeting we had a communication where someone suggested that there might be some distance and we're not engaging the public as much as we could or should. And Mr. McClure's email is saying the same thing. And so I thought we ought to talk about it a little bit, and maybe it'll be a topic for later discussion or ongoing discussion, but there were just 2 points that I really wanted to make while you're here. One is it's fine to have a conversation over the fence or at the restaurant or whatever with the citizen stuff, but not with respect to matters that are before this body in its quasi-judicial capacity. And that makes up a great deal of what we're doing. The rezonings and conditional use permits, we have legal standards that we have to comply with. And understandable that members of the public don't understand that, don't know that, don't appreciate it. But the whole legal process can be undone by a series of ex parte communications. And one thing that, this is going to sound like a criticism, okay, of your email, and it is, okay. But you mentioned ex parte and transparency in the same breath in your memo, and there's a disconnect, a real disconnect between ex parte communications and transparency in government. You have transparency is what we do here tonight, where you have everything on the record in a quasi-judicial matter, rezonings, conditional use permits. The public sees what we're considering, and we hope and we believe that we're not acting on other stray comments or communications that are made outside this room. You act on the basis of the public record, the staff report, the applicant's submission, the public hearing comments. That's it. That's the record. Not some stray comments out on the street or a phone call from someone. Those ex parte communications in those contexts, they undo due process, and they create legal problems for the city. Whether it's adverse to the applicant or to members of the public, it's just a bad deal. Now, you can have ex parte communications all you want. I would love for people to call me up and say, talk about planning, area plan, this neighborhood plan, all that. That's fair game. Everything that's not quasi-judicial, we can hear and talk and respond to any comments that are made in the public. So that's point number one. Okay, there's just some areas that are just really off limits to the ex parte communications. And that's why we go through a disclosure and sometimes a recusal process, because we've been compromised by an ex parte communication. The other thing I wanted to mention, Mr. Chairman, and this is directed to all my friends on the commission, I think where we, in my opinion, my thought is that we could do better in communicating to the people who are attending the hearings and watching if we gave more detail out of the staff reports. And it's not a criticism of you guys. I think you're doing what we've asked you to do. But we have tremendous reports. The 2 reports today were great. But the public doesn't know them. When we sit through a hearing and we get a fairly abrupt, concise staff report, and there's maybe minimal or virtually no discussion amongst us because this is all great. What do those folks out there think? Now the staff report's available, but I doubt that too many members of the public take the time to go online and read the staff report. So but this is me, okay? I think we ought to ask staff, I think we ought to think about asking staff, instead of a 2-minute or 3-minute summation of a staff report, and I don't like long meetings either, but a 10-minute staff report, 6, 8, 10-minute staff report, and specifically focusing on the golden factors. So people in the audience know golden factor, this is the golden factor stated succinctly, and this is how this application relates, good or bad, to that, in the opinion of staff, how it relates to the golden factor. So they'll know that we're not just being led around the nose by the staff, that we're reading stuff and we know what's in there. And there is material in there that's important, but we can't spend the time to read through it word for word. And maybe a prefatory comment at each meeting would be to remind members of the public that we have detailed staff reports that we deal with, and they're sent on up to the city council, and they're available online.
Mr. Chairman, if I could,
Does he have the floor, Mr. Chairman?
No, back in the old days, go back to Felker and Joan.
Yeah.
we had zoning and planning committee.
Right.
And we had planning and policy committee. So what happened in those committee meetings, open to the public, we were able to ferret out a lot of the problems. So you don't really need a 10-minute staff report. But what you do is you create another way to diffuse the time bomb where the public can come and have an open forum. And some new ideas came out of those committee meetings. And they were very helpful. I mean, I think the whole goal is to make, this should be a streamlined process. Now, one thing in my 18 years of the odyssey of living in 11 different communities, for example, Ventura, California, after the planning commission meeting, that was it. You guys were the final say. It didn't go to the city. And this is so important. You guys are so important for unifying our community and economic development, because if you consider that every time that we build a new building and maybe create retail sales, you know, economic development starts in the neighborhoods, and we really need your help. So I pray that, and it's lovely that we're addressing these, and thank you again for the opportunity to have that public comment. Thank you.
Well, I do agree, Mr. Kopp's comment that maybe there is some detail. Now, I'm not going to tell you to go to 10-minute staff reports because I'm leaving the commission, so I'm not going to.
20 minutes. 20
for the rest of you. But
About 30 minutes.
that's right. I mean, I was prepared to go back and ask questions about Adams when it was suggested they could just run the road off Adams to the staff to get that clarification, because I had it in the report. But then the applicants came up and addressed that, so I didn't need that. But those are the kinds of things, and I look back as I think as chair, I should have done a better job of doing that.
Where I should have done a better job.
And so I just,
in just commission discussion too, because I think it's not just enough to hear from the staff in more detail so the public hears what's going on, but this really came to mind when we had the up on Eugene and Paramore a while back at the second go around, Mr. Chairman. You did it wasn't lengthy, it was probably under a minute, but a little summation of what your thoughts were. You know, and I think, well, that's what all of us ought to do each meeting on each item. You know, now that's overkill, but you know, I kick myself for not just saying, well, attaboy, you know, that's me too, you know, when you made those comments, but that's what the public needs to hear.
I think it helps when they hear that you heard them.
right,
We're not ignoring the comments. We heard the comment.
absolutely.
We may disagree with it, but we heard it. So,
I interrupted you, Mark. I'm
No,
sorry.
no, I was done.
any other comments on? All right, so are you going to send out a red line?
Yes, I'll send you a red line with my changes, and then I will include maybe 3 versions of the bylaws with Commissioner Pearson and Commissioner Nager's changes, and then you can vote on, pick out which one you'd like. How about that?
Okay.
Okay.
Well, Mr. Chairman, not to be relentless on this, but I mean, the idea of having a more detailed staff report verbalized, is that something you want to talk about at a meeting on down the line, or do you want to drop it altogether, or do you want to tell them have at it?
I guess maybe, is it just is there specific things we want to make sure we hit that we're not hitting now?
So what are you?
Everything's in writing, everything's there.
Right.
It's just not being, people aren't hearing it.
Yeah, so what items are you thinking they need to go into more detail about?
I think when you mentioned the golden, no one in the audience knows what the golden factor is. And maybe just, and it might be a good idea, maybe the beginning comment is a quick synopsis of what the golden factor is and how we are judging against it, not.
These guys can do it.
Yeah. That might make it more clear to those in the audience that night, this is what we're judging it against.
I mean, that's what we do in a local landmarks commission meeting. There's a certain set of things that we have to consider for each case. I don't know what they're landmarks are, the cases.
Cases.
Yeah, they're cases. So, and they go through each one of them. It's not in great detail, because it's normally only us in the room, but still.
Well, just saying that this-
But it is helpful for us to remind ourselves exactly what we're supposed to be thinking about in terms when we're making a decision. So I don't think it's just for the audience either. It's also a good reminder for us.
True.
But we already get it, and they don't know. I like your idea, Mr. Chair, that maybe a summary by you at the beginning to remind them, there was this case that directs how we have to evaluate each of these cases, and it set out a series of factors. And we get a staff report that takes us through each of those factors, applying what the information is as it relates to this case that we are considering, and that's part of what this staff report, just so they understand we're not just
It's not arbitrary.
coming out of thin air, right?
And maybe it's good to remind them that we get this ahead of time and have gone through it all
Right.
in detail individually.
And I think that sounds better coming from the commission chair than from staff, because then that's the commission speaking about the commission's role.
Yeah.
It can just be part of that.
But the explanation of what the golden factors are comes from staff. We say that the standard we're held to is to make a reasonable decision. And the courts have said, if you consider these factors, then, you've probably made a reasonable decision.
Mary, is that something that, could you put a little paragraph or some verbiage together based on the points of the golden factor?
Sure, I
Since it's a
can,
lawsuit
yes, I can do that for the chair,
that we
yes,
can look at?
sure.
I would offer that we can put together something visual too. That way, people that are watching, there could be something that pops up that's just a slide that kicks off the conversation as you're going through that.
It's a great idea.
That's good.
I have one other question. Zoe Brown, did you just start as an intern? What,
I've been here since May.
May?
End of May, and before I was here at Topeka, I was an intern with Johnson County.
Okay. Awesome. You did a good job tonight.
Thank you. It's my first presentation.
Yeah. Good job.
Good job.
All right, is there anything else to discuss tonight?
Just some communications real quick. So Eugene and Paramore, I don't know if everybody knows that was approved by the governing body last week. They got the 8 votes they needed, so it was 8-2. So that case is done. Some of you know this, we had an accessory dwelling unit committee meeting last week. And William, I did not record it, so sorry. Even though I got his email like an hour before and I completely forgot. But we'll put notes together and send them out, and we'll send out a doodle poll for the next meeting. It was a good meeting. We had really good feedback and some good ideas. So that's my communications.
Okay.
I would maybe share in addition to that, one of the things that came out of the budget process this year with council was discussion around neighborhood profiles, which is something that staff, Bryson, Risley, neighborhood planner, had worked on with each of the NIAs. And I think we had maybe had 2 or 3 that were done, and then COVID, and so things paused and shifted. But that's something that we're going to revisit and be looking at, maybe working with Visit Topeka to use some of their assets that they have as well, to help make them even more beautiful and hopefully marketable for the NIAs to utilize, and trying to attract development to their communities.
Thank you. And if that's everything, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, have a good evening, everyone.